"You were always the disappointment," his mother said, loud enough for 200 guests to hear, "and tonight you proved it again." The hall went quiet. Forks stopped moving. His brother's new wife looked down at her plate, and his father didn't even bother looking up from his phone. Anil Verma stood there in a borrowed sherwani, smiling the smile he had perfected over 31 years of being the family's cautionary tale. He had no idea that in 11 minutes, a black government Innova would pull into that wedding hall's driveway, and 2 officers from India's most feared investigative agency would walk in and ask, by name, for him. The Grand Pavilion Banquet Hall in Lucknow smelled of marigold and ghee and old money trying very hard to look like new money. 500 fairy lights had been strung across the ceiling for Rohan Verma's wedding, and the Verma family had spared no expense proving to 300 relatives that they had, in fact, arrived. Anil sat at table 14 near the back, beside the cousins nobody wanted to seat anywhere important. He wore a plain gray sherwani his mother had picked out for him that morning with the comment, "At least try to look like you belong tonight." Anil had let it go, the way he let most things go. He had learned a long time ago that silence cost him nothing, and explanations cost him everything. He was 31. He worked, as far as his family knew, in computers, some kind of government contract thing, nothing serious. He had not had a promotion in 6 years, not had a salary hike anyone could point to, not had a single relative able to describe his job at a dinner party. His mother, Sushila, had spent a decade and a half explaining him away with vague hand gestures. His father, Ramesh, a retired bank manager who measured every human being by designation and salary slip, had stopped introducing Anil to new acquaintances altogether. Meanwhile, Rohan, 2 years younger, had an MBA from a name everyone recognized, a sales director title at a multinational, and now a bride from a family with 3 flats in Gurgaon. Tonight was Rohan's night, and the family had decided without saying so out loud that it would also be the night they finally said what they'd been holding back about Anil for years. It started small. An uncle asked Anil in the loud, performative way certain uncles ask questions, what exactly he did for a living. Anil gave his usual answer, IT services, government side, nothing glamorous, and the uncle laughed, not unkindly, but not kindly either, and said, "Computer walla." "At least you have a job, beta." Laughter rippled outward from the table like a stone dropped in water. Anil smiled and said nothing. His mother, 3 tables away, heard the laughter and rose like she'd been waiting all evening for an opening. She crossed the hall in her stiff Banarasi sari, the kind that announced its price tag with every rustle, and she did not lower her voice when she reached his table. "What are you telling people now?" she said. "That you have a government job? Sushila, please." She turned to the relatives at the table, inviting them in as witnesses, the way she always did when she wanted an audience for Anil's smallness. "He sits in some office typing things. No designation, no growth. 31 years old and still living in that rented flat, still asking his father for money in March for his insurance." "Ma," Anil said quietly, "not here." "Where then?" Her voice rose, theatrical, practiced. "You think I don't know what people whisper?" "That Ramesh's younger son did everything right and the older one did nothing. Look at your brother." She gestured at Rohan, glowing under the mandap lights 40 feet away. "Designation, bungalow, a wife from a good family. And you—" She looked at him the way she might look at a stain on the tablecloth. "You were always the disappointment, and tonight you proved it again, sitting here in a borrowed coat letting strangers laugh at you." The hall had gone quieter than weddings usually allow themselves to go. Conversations at nearby tables had thinned to murmurs and sideways glances. Rohan's new wife, Priya, looked down at her plate of paneer, her face flushing on Anil's behalf. Ramesh did not look up from his phone, which Anil had long ago learned was his father's preferred method of being present for cruelty without participating in it. Anil set down his glass of thumbs up very carefully, the way a man sets down something when his hands have started almost imperceptibly to shake, not from anger, but from the old, familiar ache of being unseen by the only people who were supposed to see him at all. "I should go check on something," he said. He stood, buttoned his sherwani, and walked toward the entrance, past the floral arch, past the photographer adjusting his tripod, past 200 people who had just watched his mother dismantle him in public and had collectively decided not to notice. What none of them knew, not his mother, not his father, not Rohan glowing under string lights 40 feet away, was that Anil Verma had not been typing anything in an office for the past 4 years. He had been one of 11 officers nationally cleared for Operation Kalsutra, a Central Bureau of Investigation task force unwinding a cross-border financial fraud network that had, in the last 18 months alone, traced and frozen assets worth over 400 crore rupees. His government contract job? was a cover so thorough that even his own security clearance forms listed his designation as a systems consultant. He had spent the last 6 weeks in 3 different cities chasing the final thread of a case that had started as a routine shell company audit and become something with implications for 2 ongoing parliamentary inquiries. He had also, that very morning, missed 4 calls from a number he wasn't supposed to ignore for more than 10 minutes. He stepped outside into the cool November air, took out a second phone, black, unbranded with no contacts saved under real names, and saw the missed calls. He exhaled slowly, the way he'd been trained to exhale before doing anything that mattered, and called back. "Sir," he said when the line connected. "Sorry, I was at my brother's wedding, family event." "I know where you are," said the voice on the other end, Joint Director Kavita Rao, the woman who had recruited him out of a forensic accounting fellowship 4 years ago and never once raised her voice in his presence, which was somehow more frightening than if she had. "That's actually why I'm calling. We need you tonight." Inside, the wedding photographer was arranging the bride's family for a portrait. Nobody had noticed Anna leave. Nobody would notice, for the next 11 minutes, that the disappointment of the Verma family was standing in a parking lot quietly being told that a man he had spent 6 weeks building a case against, a man named Vikram Oberoi, a slick Gurgaon-based investment consultant, who had laundered crores through shell logistics firms, and was, as of 2 hours ago, attempting to flee the country on a private charter out of Lucknow's own airport. Had just surfaced 40 kilometers from where Anil was currently standing in a borrowed Sherwani holding a paper plate of half-eaten gulab jamun. "You're the only officer on the team within 90 minutes of the airport," Rao said. "I need eyes on him before the lookout circular clears immigration. I know it's your brother's wedding. I wouldn't ask if there were another option." Anil looked back through the glass doors at the warm gold light of the hall, at his mother now laughing with some other aunt as though she hadn't just gutted her own son in front of 300 people, at his father still scrolling his phone, at Rohan dancing badly and happily with his new wife. "Give me the coordinates," Anil said. "I'll go now." He went back inside only long enough to find his cousin Deepak, the one person at the wedding who had ever asked Anil a real question about his life and accepted, "I can't really talk about it," as an answer rather than an insult. "Cover for me if anyone asks," Anil said. "Tell them I had an emergency at work." Deepak raised an eyebrow. "On a Saturday night computer emergency?" "Something like that," Anil said and was gone. What happened over the next 90 minutes did not, technically, require Anil Verma to do anything heroic. It required him to sit in an unmarked Innova outside a private aviation hangar, watching a man named Vikram Oberoi attempt to bribe a ground staff supervisor into expediting a flight plan, and to relay license plate numbers and flight slot details to a CBI field team that was, by now, 20 minutes from arriving. It required him to keep his voice level when Oberoi's security detail, 2 large men who clearly weren't airport staff, began walking the perimeter of the hangar with the loose, scanning gait of men checking for exactly the kind of vehicle Anil happened to be sitting in. It required him to duck low, kill the interior lights, and quietly request armed backup be moved up by 15 minutes, because something about Oberoi's posture, the 2 frequent glances at his watch, the second phone he kept checking, told Anil that the man knew, or suspected, that his exit window was closing faster than his lawyers had promised him. It also required him to do something he had not expected to do that night. Identify himself, out loud by his actual designation, to a Lucknow airport security officer who had begun radioing for local police to clear the unmarked vehicle from a restricted access road. "I need you to stand down," Anil said, stepping out of the Innova with his CBI identification held open. "Inspector ready, this is a Central Bureau of Investigation operation in progress. I need this perimeter held not breached for the next 10 minutes. The airport security officer, a man twice Anil's age who had spent the evening assuming this lean young man in a Sherwani, at an airport at 11 at night, was some confused wedding guest who'd wandered onto the wrong access road, looked at the identification card, then at Anil's face, then back at the card. "You're CBI," the officer said slowly, the way a person says something they're still in the process of believing. "Deputy Superintendent Anil Verma," Anil said. "Special Task Force Operation Kalsutra. The man in that hangar is a flight risk under an active lookout circular. I need your help, not your interference. Can you do that?" It was the first time in 4 years Anil Verma had said his own title out loud in full to a stranger without a cover story wrapped around it. It felt strange in his mouth, like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut. 20 minutes later, 3 more CBI vehicles arrived, lights off, doors opening before the engines had fully stopped. Vikram Oberoi, halfway up the boarding stairs of a chartered jet, looked down to see 4 officers and a man in a wedding sherwani standing on the tarmac, and understood, in the particular way that men like him always understand a moment too late, that the 18 months he had spent moving money through shell companies in Dubai, Mauritius, and a logistics firm in Noida had just ended on an airport access road in Lucknow because the one officer the agency had on hand happened to be wearing the wrong clothes for the job and the right instincts for it. "Deputy Superintendent Verma," Oberoi said as he was brought down the stairs in cuffs, recognition and disbelief warring on his face. "You're the analyst from the shell company filings, the systems consultant." He laughed, a brittle, panicked sound. "You people send accountants to make arrests now. I'm not an accountant tonight," Anil said. "Tonight I'm just the man who happened to be free." He did not say it bitterly. He said it the way a person says a fact they have only just, in this instant, fully understood about themselves. The arrest of Vikram Oberoi was not, on its own, the end of the story, not for the CBI, and not for the Verma family. It was instead the moment that opened a second door nobody at table 14 would have predicted. While Anil sat in a debrief room at the Lucknow CBI office at 1 in the morning, still in his crumpled sherwani, drinking tea from a paper cup and giving his statement, Joint Director Rao walked in with a tablet in her hand, and an expression Anil had learned over 4 years to read as trouble. "We pulled the financials off Oberoi's laptop on site," she said, setting the tablet in front of him. "Standard procedure, cross-reference every transaction against active investigations." She tapped the screen. "This came back, I need you to look at it before anyone else does," Anil scrolled. It was a wire transfer log, 12 months of payments routed through one of Oberoi's shell logistics entities, the same network Anil had spent 6 weeks unwinding. Most of the names meant nothing to him. One did not. RVRMA, loan consolidation, rupee 38,000,000 dispersed in 4 tranches over 14 months. Anil read it twice, then a third time, the way a person rereads a sentence hoping the second or third pass will change its meaning. "That's my father's name," Anil said quietly. "Ramesh Verma, retired bank manager. He took a private loan 18 months ago." He told the family it was a consolidation loan from a cooperative society for the wedding expenses and to clear some old property dues. He looked up. "He never said who from." Rao's voice softened, the way it did only on the rare occasions she allowed herself to remember the people behind the case files. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you, Anil. I'm telling you because it's about to become relevant to the investigation, and I would rather you hear it from me at 1 in the morning than read it in a charge sheet in front of your family." The pieces assembled themselves with the cold, mechanical inevitability Anil had come to associate with the worst moments of his career. Except this time the case file had his own surname in it. Oberoi's network didn't just launder money for shell logistics fraud. It also ran a side operation, predatory, private consolidation loans to retirees with strong credit histories and clean reputations, men exactly like Ramesh Verma, structured to look like simple personal borrowing, but in fact used to move dirty money through clean, respectable bank accounts that would never attract scrutiny. Ramesh hadn't known, almost certainly. He had likely been recruited by a smooth-talking relationship manager who promised low interest and discretion, the same way thousands of retirees across North India had been recruited into Oberoi's network without ever understanding what they were actually carrying. But the money in his father's account, money that had quietly paid for half of Rohan's wedding, the very wedding hall fairy lights, and the catering and the gold-bordered invitation cards his mother had been so proud of had passed, for 14 months, through accounts the CBI was now formally seizing as proceeds of fraud. "He's not a target," Rao said, watching Anil's face carefully. "Not yet. Right now he's a victim who needs to be interviewed, and the funds in his account are subject to a freezing order that's going to be filed within 48 hours regardless of who his son is. I need you to understand that I can't make this easier for your family because of who you are to this case. If anything, it has to be harder, cleaner, so nobody can ever say the investigation went soft because a CBI officer's father was involved." Anil nodded slowly. The tea in his hands had gone cold. "Do it exactly the way you do it for anyone else," he said. "I'll tell them myself." He did not go home that night. He stayed at the CBI guest quarters, slept 4 hours, and in the morning, before the freezing order could be filed, before any official notice could land at his parents' door like a stranger's accusation, he drove to the house where he had grown up, and where, less than 12 hours earlier, his mother had called him a disappointment in front of 200 wedding guests. Sushila Verma opened the door still in her dressing gown, hungover on wedding adrenaline and sweet lassie, and looked at her son standing on the doorstep in the same crumpled sherwani he'd disappeared in the night before. "Where did you go last night?" she said, more confused than angry now, the morning having softened the edges of the previous night's cruelty into something that almost looked on her face like embarrassment she wasn't ready to name. "Deepak said you had a work emergency. On a wedding night." "Honestly, Anil, what kind of computer job calls you out of your own brother's wedding?" "Is Papa awake?" Anil asked. "I need to talk to both of you. It's about the loan he took for the wedding." Something in his voice, a flatness, a weight he had never let his mother hear before, made Sushila step back from the door without arguing. Ramesh sat at the kitchen table in his kurta, a cup of tea going cold in front of him, the same posture he'd held the night before when he hadn't looked up from his phone while his wife humiliated their elder son. He looked up now. "What's wrong with you?" he said. "You disappear from your brother's wedding, you come back looking like you slept in a gutter, and now you want to talk about money at 8 in the morning." Anil sat down across from him, and for the first time in years he did not soften his words to make himself smaller in this house. "Papa, the consolidation loan you took 18 months ago, who arranged it for you?" Ramesh's jaw tightened, the particular tightness of a proud man who suspects he is about to be embarrassed and is choosing for now to be angry instead. "A relationship manager. Why does it matter to you? I handled it properly, all documentation, all proper channels." "What was the name of the firm?" "Prabhat Logistics Financial Services. Why?" "Because Prabhat Logistics is a shell company," Anil said quietly, "and the man who runs it was arrested by the Central Bureau of Investigation last night for money laundering, fraud, and attempting to flee the country. And I was the officer who held the perimeter until backup arrived." The kitchen went very still. Sushila's hand, halfway to pouring fresh tea, stopped in midair. "The Central Bureau of," Ramesh started and then stopped as though the words had physically run into something on their way out of his mouth. You work in computers, you said." "I've worked for the CBI for 4 years, Anil said. "Systems consultant was a cover designation, Papa. My real rank is Deputy Superintendent of Police attached to the Economic Offenses and Financial Fraud Division. I couldn't tell you, not because I didn't trust you. Because the job requires it, and because," his voice caught very slightly, and he let it for once, "because every time I tried to imagine telling this family, I imagined Ma asking why I never got promoted from it, and you asking what the salary was compared to Rohan's, and I decided it was easier to be the disappointment than to explain something none of you would believe anyway." Sushila set the teapot down with a clatter. "You let me say those things last night," she said, and her voice had a tremor in it now that hadn't been there at the wedding, something closer to horror than anger. "In front of everyone, I called you—" She could not finish the sentence. "You did," Anil said gently, because there was no version of this conversation where cruelty back would accomplish anything. "And I let you because that's what I've always done, but that's not why I'm here this morning. I'm here because the money that came in through that loan, the money that paid for half of Rohan's wedding, is going to be frozen by my own agency within the next 2 days. You're not a suspect, Papa. You're a victim, like a few hundred other retirees that man preyed on. But there's going to be a formal interview, an account freeze, possibly some money you'll need to return pending the investigation. I needed you to hear that from me today before it arrived as a letter from a stranger." Ramesh Verma, a man who had spent his entire adult life measuring worth in designations and salary slips, sat with his cold tea and looked at his son. Not the disappointment from table 14, not the computer walla from the family WhatsApp group, but a 31-year-old deputy superintendent of police who had spent a wedding night standing on a runway holding the line on a fugitive while his own family humiliated him in absentia. And for the first time in years. Ramesh Verma did not know what to say at all. It was Rohan who found out next, and not gently. He had come over that afternoon, still glowing with the particular exhaustion of newly married men, to find his mother sitting silently at the kitchen table and his father staring at his phone with an expression that had nothing to do with the cricket scores he usually pretended to read there. "What happened?" Rohan asked. "Why does it feel like someone died?" It was Sushila of all people who told him, haltingly in pieces the way a person describes a building they watched collapse. By the time she finished, Rohan was sitting very still, staring at the kitchen door as though Anil might still be standing there in last night's sherwani. "He's CBI," Rohan said. "Anil, our Anil." "Deputy Superintendent," Ramesh said quietly, testing the title in his mouth the way Anil had tested it on the tarmac the night before. Rohan laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was the laugh of a man recalculating an entire life's worth of comparisons in real time. "I told my in-laws he was unambitious," he said slowly. At the Sanjeet, I told them I joked that my brother types things in an office and I do the real work. Priya's father laughed. Everyone laughed. You didn't know, Sushila said, though it sounded like she was saying it to herself as much as to her son. None of us knew, Rohan said, because none of us asked. We just decided years ago what he was, and we never once let him be anything else. He stood up abruptly. Where is he? He found Anil 2 hours later, at his small rented flat across town, sitting on a balcony with the same paper cup tea he'd been drinking all night, finally out of the sherwani, finally in his own clothes, a faded department t-shirt, the kind issued to officers for internal fitness drills, the only piece of his actual job he'd ever risked keeping visible in his own home. Rohan stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. I called you a failure to my father-in-law's face, he said finally. At my own Sanjeet. I said it like a joke, but I meant some of it, Anil. I've meant some version of it for years. Anil didn't look up from his tea immediately. I know. How long has it been? 4 years? 4 years in the field, 2 before that in training, which Ma thought was a computer certification course gone very long. A small, tired smile. I didn't correct her. Rohan sat down across from him on the narrow balcony, careful and slow, like a man entering a room he wasn't sure he was welcome in anymore. I always thought, he said, that you just didn't try as hard as me, that you didn't want it as much. I built the whole comparison between us on that idea. And it turns out you were standing on an airport tarmac arresting a fraud kingpin while I was dancing to a DJ thinking I was the more serious brother. He laughed again, hollow. I don't even know how to apologize for that. I don't think sorry covers 14 years of it. It doesn't, Anil said, not cruelly, just honestly. But it's a start. Why didn't you ever just tell us, even once, even quietly? Anil set the tea down and looked out at the city for a moment before answering. Because the first year I tried in training, I came home and told Ma I'd been selected for something serious, something I was proud of, and she asked if it paid more than your first sales job. When I said the starting pay was modest, she changed the subject to your bonus. After that, I stopped trying to be seen as anything except what would make her stop asking questions. I learned to disappear because disappearing hurt less than being measured and found wanting every single time. He turned to look at his brother fully. It's not really about the CBI, Rohan. It never was. It's about being someone's child and learning that what you actually do with your life will never be enough unless it comes with a number attached that they can repeat to relatives. Rohan had no answer for that. He simply sat with it, the way a person sits with the first true thing they've heard in a long time. The formal fallout, when it came, moved with the bureaucratic speed of any government process, slow, then suddenly all at once. Within the week, the Enforcement Directorate, working alongside the CBI's Financial Crimes Division, filed asset freezing orders against 14 accounts connected to Vikram Oberoi's shell network, including the dummy entity through which Ramesh Verma's consolidation loan had been routed. Ramesh was formally interviewed, not as a suspect, but as one of 19 identified victims whose retirement accounts had been used as laundering conduits. And after 2 weeks of paperwork, document verification, and one deeply uncomfortable afternoon at the CBI regional office where the duty officer at the front desk recognized Anil and called him sir, in front of his own father, Ramesh's funds were released from the freeze, untouched, with a formal letter clearing him of any wrongdoing. The second twist arrived almost as an afterthought, the kind of detail that surfaces only once investigators have stopped looking for headlines and started looking for patterns. While cross-referencing the 19 victims of Oberoi's retiree loan scheme, a junior analyst on Anil's team noticed something odd. 6 of the 19 victims, including Ramesh Verma, had all been introduced to the same relationship manager. A smooth, well-dressed man named Suresh Baisha who had worked the social circuit of retired bank officers, ex-civil servants, and minor local dignitaries for the better part of 2 years, cultivating trust through golf club introductions and temple committee meetings before ever mentioning the word loan. When the team pulled Baisha's employment records, they found that he had, 11 years earlier, briefly worked as a junior officer in the very bank branch Ramesh Verma had managed before retirement, and had been quietly let go after an internal audit flagged irregular cash handling that the bank, eager to avoid scandal, had never formally reported to police. He didn't pick your father by accident, Rao told Anil, laying the personnel file on the desk between them. He remembered him. Your father was the manager who fired him all those years ago for the cash discrepancy. This wasn't random predation. Baisha built an entire client list partly out of men he held grudges against, men he felt had wronged him on the way up. Your father was the first name on a list of 7. Anil sat with that for a long moment, Does my father know this? Not yet. We'll need his statement on the original termination for the case file. But I wanted you to hear it before it became part of an official interview. Rao closed the folder. Your father didn't just get unlucky, Anil. He was deliberately targeted by a man he'd disciplined over a decade ago and never thought about again. There's a kind of justice in that if you squint. The son he dismissed as unserious is the one who's about to put the man who targeted him behind bars. When Anil told his father 2 days later, sitting once more at that same kitchen table, Ramesh was quiet for a long time. Suresh, he said finally, almost to himself. Thin man, always smiling too much. I remember him. I told the regional office he should be prosecuted and they told me it would embarrass the branch and asked me to let it go quietly instead. He looked at his son. I let it go quietly. And 11 years later it came back and tried to take my retirement and nearly ruined my younger son's wedding. And the only reason it didn't was because the son I never asked enough questions about happened to be standing on a runway that night. You couldn't have known, Anil said. No, Ramesh agreed. But I should have asked about all of it years ago. He reached across the table, an unfamiliar gesture between them, and rested his hand briefly on his son's arm. I'm sorry, Beta. Not just for last night, for longer than that. The trial of Vikram Oberoi and the formal charges against Suresh Baisha took the better part of a year to reach court. Financial fraud cases in India rarely move quickly. And this one, tangled with cross-border transfers, shell entities in 3 jurisdictions, and 19 separate victim statements, moved slower than most. But when the special CBI court in Lucknow finally delivered its verdict, it delivered it decisively. Vikram Oberoi was convicted on counts of money laundering, criminal conspiracy, and cheating, and sentenced to 9 years imprisonment along with the seizure of assets valued at over 200 crore rupees. Suresh Baisha, convicted of criminal breach of trust and cheating by personation, received 5 years. The court's written judgment specifically commended the timely and resourceful intervention of Deputy Superintendent A. Verma, whose on-the-ground action at the Lucknow airport had prevented the principal accused from fleeing the jurisdiction, language that found its way, almost word for word, into a single paragraph of local newspaper coverage that Sushila Verma would, within 48 hours, have laminated and placed on the family Mandir shelf, next to a photograph of Lord Ganesh, where it remains to this day. The wedding anniversary party a year later was a much smaller affair than Rohan's wedding had been, just family on the rooftop of the Verma house. String lights strung up by Rohan himself this time, no caterers, no photographer with a tripod. Anil came in his own clothes, no borrowed sherwani, no apology needed for what he wore or who he was. His mother had, in the months since, learned to introduce him properly at family gatherings. Carefully, almost shyly, the way a person learns a new language late in life and is still proud of every correctly pronounced word. My elder son, she would say now, works in serious government investigation work. CBI, very important cases. She still didn't entirely understand what he did, but she had stopped needing to compress it into something small enough to be comfortable. Ramesh raised a toast that evening, his voice steadier than Anil had heard it in years. To both my sons, he said, who I measured wrong for a long time in different ways for different reasons, to the one who taught me what real work looks like when nobody's watching, and to the one learning a little late to say sorry out loud. He looked at Anil. And to whatever you can't tell us about the next case, we'll wait. We've learned to wait. Anil smiled, raised his glass, and said nothing about the new file sitting in his locked drawer at the office. 3 names, 2 cities, and a financial trail that started, as they so often did, with a man nobody suspected of being capable of much at all. Outside, on the street below, the fairy lights from Rohan's wedding hall a year earlier had long since come down, but the family had finally learned to see, in the quiet, unglamorous man who used to sit at table 14, something they had spent 31 years failing to notice was there all along. Not a disappointment, but the steadiest, quietest kind of strength. The kind that doesn't need an audience to be real, and doesn't stop showing up just because nobody claps for it. This story is a reminder that the people we dismiss the fastest are sometimes carrying the weight we'll never see until the moment it saves us. Real worth was never about the title someone says out loud at a dinner table. It's about what a person does when no one's watching and everyone's already decided who they are. If this story of quiet strength and hard-earned vindication moved you, go ahead and tap that like button. It genuinely helps a story like this reach more people who need to hear it. Share it with someone who's ever been underestimated by their own family. And if you want more stories like Anil's, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.